An Indigenous-led think tank is stopping its annual report tracking Canada's actions on the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, saying the country's progress has been too slow. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued 94 calls to action in 2015. The Yellowhead Institute has been tracking the country's progress since 2019 in annual reports of their own and says it considers only 13 recommendations to be completed in the last 8 years.
Are we where we need to be?
Unfortunately not. It is a glacial pace, as we've said in the past year. At this rate, reconciliation won't happen until 2081.
The Indigenous-led Research and Education Centre, based out of Toronto's Metropolitan University, released its final report this year, saying there's a lack of political will and paternalism.
Canada has this mentality of we know best, and we're not going to move on any significant action if we don't necessarily have to. This mentality is at the root of colonization in Canada. It's this idea that Euro-Western values are better than Indigenous knowledges, Indigenous worldviews, and Indigenous politics, and so on.
The Commission brings light to the injustices and harms committed, including through the intergenerational trauma inflicted by Canada's residential school system. The calls to action, which are directed towards all levels of governments, along with institutions like academia and media, are a step towards truth, healing, and reconciliation. The Yellowhead Institute says it's concerning that a majority of the calls are incomplete.
That means that residential school survivors will not see full implementation of the calls to action, and that another generation of Indigenous children will be growing up with systems that continue to harm them.
How should this be perceived that we're no longer going to be getting this report?
I think Canadians need to be watching the National Council for Reconciliation.
The Canadian government says it's fully committed to implementing the calls to action that fall within its jurisdiction, also pointing to the establishment of the National Council for Reconciliation.
The National Council for Reconciliation should be producing reports that provide an analysis to Canadians about the movement on the calls to action. That is the purpose.
The Yellowhead Institute says in order to have substantial movement, there needs to be at least 5 calls to action completed each year. It says it's continuing to work to uplift, support, and platform other watchdogs and collaborate with organizations. CityNews reached out to Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada last week for a response. We did not hear back in time for deadline.